A lot of my Battletech tactics revolve around examining and exploring questions. This idea that in the game universe, we all have our favorite mechs. Mechs we should be playing, mechs we want to play. That's before we even layer on vehicles, support craft, other options. You want to build, in my opinion, the narrative, you want to build an impressive model collection. You want to play with a lot of toys on the table. So I find the first layer in Battletech is coming up with tactics, coming up with a plan, and then from there, plugging in the appropriate resources per battle value. Mechs, vehicles, tanks, whatever it's going to be. So the question for today involves blocking units. What is going to be your blocking unit for dedicated support mechs? Now, I define a dedicated support mech. I should back up for a moment, and we should explore definitions a little bit here. A dedicated support unit, a dedicated support mech, is a mech or a tank vehicle that has 100% of its battle value resources dedicated to reaching out as far as it can and touching the other side of the table. Examples, a longbow could be a partisan tank with the quad autocannons, could be the humble LRM carrier on there. Its role is to leverage the maximum amount of long-range fire, ballistic or even missile. We could even say, if it's Intersphere Tech pushing out the PPC, the Shrek PPC carrier would be an example of a dedicated support vehicle, a dedicated support mech. And in this case, I love playing longbows on there. The challenge here, of course, is you're going to be firing like crazy. Whatever the weapons platform is, you're going to get into a good position on the table for the mission and just soaking your opponent with lots and lots of damage. They're not going to let that happen. Due to the nature of it being long range, they're going to have to send something in to suppress that, something in to take it out. Now, here's where the duality happens. Okay, I get a little sad face when my longbow gets taken out or I lose my LRM carrier, but I can't be overly sad faced because my opponent has to do that. They can't allow literally real-time hundreds and hundreds of missiles to rain down on them, direct or indirect fire. Even indirect fire, something is going to connect on there. But being a support mech means I can't move. I want to have the least amount of modifiers as possible. I'm going to be dealing with range modifiers on my part, striking out at long range, which is fine. As soon as I'm on range, we start rolling the dice. And there's going to be possibly terrain or possibly opposing movement modifiers from your opponent. So I don't want to be stacking any walk or run dice on there. We just don't want to do that. This leaves me vulnerable to being attacked. I'm not going to run away. I'm going to stand there and deal with whatever comes my way. So a blocking unit is something that puts up a literal shield that if your opponent is going to cross through, they're going to be slowed down or seriously damaged or possibly taken out. Because as you approach, using this example of a longbow, as you approach my longbow, when I'm really aware that you're coming for it, I'm going to switch target priority and start soaking you with hundreds of missiles. If I can buy myself another round or two, plus some additional damage from a blocking unit, that is an interesting wall of iron to cross through. At the very least, for any battle value, infantry. Now, I know I just said, look, we're not going to talk about units. You're going to fill things in on your checklist. I'm going to break that rule for a little bit. Just taking 4 or 5 stands of infantry for the battle value. Could be jump infantry, could be just infantry on foot. Usually they're foot infantry. I don't need them to be mech'd up. Deploying them with your longbows, LRM carriers, dedicated support. Jaeger mech would be an example. Having them work in tandem, get into position, that's a nasty little ring to set up. That's the first level. The next level of blocking units have to be resilient, good armor, and in my mind, extreme alpha damage. So examples, Demolisher tanks. A lot of use for Demolisher tanks. 2 Demolisher tanks parked 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 hexes, so at least it's pushing out opposing mechs, pushing their medium-range weapons out to long range if they want to engage the longbows. That's going to be tough to crack, especially if I can get those tanks in terrain. They've got the redundancy on there. I want the turret. That's important because I'm going to be taking a lot of return fire. I'm going to be getting chewed up with motive damage. I might get immobilized. Even if I get immobilized, that 360 threat zone of the turret, that's big. Other blocking units could be mechs on there. In the past, I also have used a Thunderbolt. I've used a Warhammer, something that, like a Warhammer is a great example, has a lot of bite on there, but the armor is a little on the weaker side. So as much as it's a heavier mech and it wants to get up there in combat, it works in perfect tandem because it's going to have the backing of hundreds of missiles behind it against targets approaching. That's an example of a blocking unit. So you are literally blocking your long-range support assets at anything that comes in. So the question to you guys, playing some sort of long-range support unit, what blocking unit do you need? And on a side note, units or mechs that are not dedicated long-range support, perfect example, Rifleman. Rifleman's got the autocannons, but it's got the lasers too. Yes, you've got heat issues, but it can put down a little bit of dice, can put down some damage if it gets engaged at close to short range. Not that it wants to, because it doesn't have the armor and doesn't have the configuration for that, but it's not as vulnerable as a longbow. Another example would be an archer. Archer can work as dedicated support, but it's not as vulnerable as something like a longbow. So with your dedicated support fire team, what are your blockers in the game?